the next step is to cut out all your pattern pieces. So after you've checked that you've marked everything on, keep your pattern pieces pinned on, or at least if you're using fabric weights, then keep the fabric weights weighting your pattern piece, whichever one it is that you're cutting out. And then all you're going to do then is just literally cut around the outside edge. I recommend if you're making anything which is from wool or a heavier duty fabric, or in actual fact, if you're just going to do a lot of cutting out and you're serious about it, you need to buy yourself a good pair of shears. These are ones that I bought on Amazon. As you can see, they're quite old now and they're a bit rusty because they've been sat on the iron. And the other thing is to keep them sharp. I used to have them sharpened, but I found that they dulled a lot quicker. These are 10-inch pair, 10-inch in length. And I find these are quite a good length to have. What I do, instead of having them sharpened now, I don't buy ridiculously expensive shears. But what I do is buy them more regularly, so that I end up with 3 or 4 pairs, and the less sharp ones started getting used for less vital jobs, maybe if I'm doing some crafting or something, and eventually they'll become paper scissors rather than fabric scissors. So they never get wasted, but it's just making sure that you start off with a good sharp pair of scissors. These do need replacing soon, actually, so that you'll see that they're not as sharp as they should be. And the other thing, when you're sewing, when you're cutting out, you should always keep your shears on the table, the bottom blade, and you need to make sure you try and keep them as upright as possible. It's really I'm going to put this into fast forward so that you don't watch me cutting out every single little tiny bit, but what you'll see is there's times where you're really tempted to do that, and you shouldn't, because as soon as you do that, your blade is going off to one side or the other, and you'll end up cutting one piece shorter than the other. So even if you cut on that line, if you're cutting at an angle, the lower down piece, the underneath piece, will end up being bigger than the top piece. You don't really want that to happen. I don't know whether I made it obvious earlier, but we're cutting 2 layers at the same time because we're cutting a pair of trousers. So we need 2 backs, 2 fronts. We need 2 fly pieces in cloth, and we need 2 pairs, which is 4 pieces of the pocket bag facing. Okay, so I'm just going to cut these out, and then I'll talk to you about cutting out the linings as well. Okay. I'll speed it all up in a moment, but just to say, when you're cutting out, keep your hand, I always stand to cut, and keep your hand on your pattern piece, so you're keeping it as flat as possible. And I'm not practicing what I'm about to say, which is you should always cut to the end of your blade, because you're less likely to get jagged edges if you cut to the end of your blade. Unfortunately, the end of your scissors is the bit that usually ends up getting dulled to begin with. So but it's good practice to cut all the way, keep your blades nice and upright, and cut all the way to the end of the blade. Okay, so as I say, stand up to cut so that you can move easily around. What you'll find is there's a point where you actually need to move your pattern pieces around as well, your fabric, and that's okay to do it. Okay, so it just means that you just take your time doing it. And when you get to a notch, just cut a little way into the seam allowance, not a massive amount because you want to use that seam allowance, but just so that you've got a little notch. Okay. Right, I'm going to carry on cutting, and we'll talk on the other side. Okay, so I have finished cutting everything out of my top fabric. So I have my front trouser, or my back trousers, or back trouser panels, and I've got my front trouser panels, 2 of each, a pair. Still keeping the pattern attached to it for the moment because in particular I need to mark that dart on. So I'll come back to those in a moment. The fly piece, which I will need in a minute, so I'm going to keep that with me, and the pocket bag facings. I don't need those at the moment, and I've got 2 pairs, so there's 4 in total. Pop those out of the way, and I just want to show you that is all the scrap, so that's the wastage. Okay, it's not a lot I can do with any of that, but I have got this bit that I can go and use at some point. What I will do for that though is just put WS on it, which means wrong side, just in case it gets opened out at any particular point, and then at least I know which was the wrong side when I was cutting out originally. Okay, so that can go into my scrap box of usable pieces. These bits unfortunately will go in the bin, because although I don't like wasting fabric, I don't have anything that I could use them for. So the next step is to cut the pocket bags and the waistband linings and the fly piece linings. So I'm just going to use a cream pocketing fabric, which is just a cheap cotton basically, for the pocket bags. So I'll get my pocket bag pattern, and I'm just going to look at how I can lay this out. So as I said when I was drafting the pattern, I don't I usually cut this on a fold, okay, and I'm going to add on seam allowance here. I can add it on here, but I don't need it at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay this on, and there's no kind of art to this particularly, but I'm just going to use the fold as a kind of guide. I'm just going to cut, doing it like this because this is my selvage edge, and I don't want to waste fabric over here, which is on the fold, which will be ultimately a bigger piece. So I'm just going to cut across here. We use a bit of wastage because I'm going to cut it higher than it needs to be, and a little bit longer, and then I'm going to fold that over. I'm not going to be as fussy about this as I was with my top fabric, because this is just a basic cotton. You can just do the pull test to find out where the selvage is. So by that I mean when you pull it, it pulls tight. That means it's a good strong line. If it was off centre, it would twist and bulge and wouldn't be as strong. So I just line that up by eye. Just make sure I've got enough seam allowance. Got enough there. And then just going to pin it on, draw around it, and then mark the opening, and then add seam allowance and cut it out. So, and I'm cutting, because I'm cutting 4 layers on the fold, that means I'm going to end up with 2 pocket bags, so a pair of pocket bags. So, right, I've got some blue chalk just so that you can see what I'm doing. I wouldn't normally mark this in blue chalk because you don't really want to have blue chalk lines showing, but it's just so that you can see what I'm doing. So you mark around your pattern piece first, like that. Just mark on the pocket openings, and then use my tape measure, which has disappeared. Just use this one, so we've got half. So this, because this is going to be attached to your front trouser leg, you need to make sure it's got the same seam allowance on that side edge. It's not so critical, and you don't have to add it on here, but you need to always add it on that side seam. And if you want to, you can add some up on there, and then it'll go further up into the waistline. But when we actually sew the waistband lining down inside the trouser, we'll actually use the top edge of the pocket to secure the waistband lining, and then that will mean that this is all secured inside anyway. So I'm just going to cut that out quickly. Okay, so that's my pocket bags already. I'm just going to mark where the pocket mouth opening is, and they can go with the rest of my patterns. Get rid of that bit. And can you see I've ended up with a bit of an odd shape, but I've still got a fold there, which ultimately at some point I can cut another pair of pocket bags out there. And then I've got this piece that I can use for something else. So not great, but it means that it's not wasting too much fabric. And then your waistband linings. So this is cotton silesia, which is a standard basic cotton lining. Use whatever you want to line your waistband trousers with. If you wanted to use something a bit fancier, you can, but I just find this is a really good standard cotton. You can use something a bit heavier as well, but I'm going to reinforce this with Stay Flex. So it's not very thick, but it's a good sturdy basic fabric to use for your waistband linings. And you're going to cut these so that they are on the bias, which means that this diagonal needs to be either in line with the weft of your fabric or the warp of your fabric, and it's however it ends up laying out. the best, basically. Again, not so critical, not as critical as it is for the top fabric, but it's, you know, fairly critical still. So what you've got to think about, this is my back one, and what I've got to think about is how much seam allowance I'm going to add. So I need to add on 1 inch on the side seam, 1/2 inch here, 2 inches at the back here, and I'm just going to cut it straight down, so it might end up being wider than the trouser, but it won't matter for the moment. And then adding on seam allowance onto the bottom. This is where I want the fold to be, so I'm going to add on about 1.5 inches, 2 inches on the bottom. So I need to know that I've got enough room there, and I haven't, so I'm just going to bring that over a little bit. There we go, and I think that would be about right. Let's just have a check with the tape measure. So say I got to put 2, say I put 1.5 here, that would be, take it to there, and then we need to have 1 inch going down, so it's still a little bit snug. And go that way a little bit, maybe. Yeah, okay. Usually I'm doing this in a way that is how it's done in the theatre. However, for my own practice, I actually add on my seam allowances to my patterns. Once I've drafted them, I would put my seam allowance on the pattern, and then that would mean that I could just literally just lay this on, and it saves a lot of time of just checking and making sure you've got everything in the right place. At some point I expect I'll show you a pattern of what I'm doing, and you'll see that I'm doing that. So what have I added on over there? What was I doing? I was going to add on 1.5 inches. I think actually I should add on 2 inches. I'm just going to add on 2 there. So it'll be 2 there, which means we've got to add on 2 down the bottom there. That's not going to fit there. So let's just mark this one on. So mark around the pattern piece as always. And then add on your seam allowance. So we've got 1 inch waistline, inch, and then we've got 1/2 inch at the top. And then 2 inches at the bottom. I'm just going to use the ruler to square that across. And then that one. Just going to follow that out like that. Okay, so that's my back waistband lining. And then my front one. So I'm going to cut out fly pieces in the lining as well, so I'd like to have them in place so I know where I'm going to lay that out. So I'm going to put this one put it up that way, just purely because I've got this little cut here, and if I line that up with there, I think that would work. So we're going to put that there. I'll probably mention this again later at some point, but the reason you cut the linings on the bias for the waistband is that when you sew them in, it just gives it a bit more give. I used to have my waistband linings cut on straight, and because I machined the lining onto the trouser, it used to always pull it tight and never used to sit very nicely. So I developed a method where I actually cut it on the bias, and it just means that it just, when you sew it together, even if you're doing it by hand, it just forms around the shape a lot easier. I think because we are essentially making a thing that will go on a 3-dimensional body, you do need to allow for the fact that there needs to be some movement in it. So I'm just checking my seam allowance. Got 1/2 inch around these 3 edges. So this piece is upside down at the moment. That's my front, centre front. So I've got 1/2 inch on there, 1/2 inch across the top, 1/2 inch on the side seam, and then we added on 2 inches onto the bottom of the back one. So we're going to add on 2 inches here. I'm just going to follow that shape out. What I'll probably do is once I've cut it out, I'll marry it up to the panels, the trouser panels, to make sure that I'm getting exactly the same shapes. Okay, so then the next step is to work out where the most savings in fabric is to put the fly piece. Now I know that at some point I will make a frock coat, and I will use the fold or this piece of the fabric. This bit here will be quite useful because I use it to do pocket bags, not pocket bags, inside a pocket flap, or a pocket bag, yeah, for an inside pocket on a jacket or something. So I like to retain where I can a fold. So I'm going to come over here and put this here. Now I need 3 lining fly pieces, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin that on there, and that will give me 2, and then I'm going to lay it on again in a moment, and get probably next to it there once I've cut these bits out, and that will give me 4, and then I can discard 1 piece. It's the easiest way of doing it. Generally when you cut fabric, you're cutting it so that you've got 2 layers being cut at the same time, and you end up, because we're usually cutting half the body, essentially we've cut a pattern for half the body, and then we're making it twice, or cutting it in fabric twice to fit both sides of the body. You cut an equal amount, so you start with 1 and then you end up cutting out 2. It's very rare that you cut something in odd numbers. So the fly piece, I think, I'll probably remember something else later, but the fly piece I think is the only thing that I end up cutting out 3 of, so, or needing 3 of, but I always cut out 4, so that and then just getting rid of 1 bit. Also, in the old days when I used to cut my fly pieces and then sew them together the wrong way, it's always quite handy to have an extra piece, so that you can start again, basically. So we will just cut this one out. And then I'm just going to literally move it over, pin it again. This is where you begin to see that my scissors aren't as sharp as they should be, because it cuts the wool quite well, but it doesn't cut the cotton as well. The cotton slides from it, but it doesn't, it's not that it doesn't matter, you can't just hack them out. I did see someone on a YouTube video saying, oh, when you do theatrical cutting, you can just cut them out, whatever seam allowance you want. It doesn't really matter because you haven't got any seam allowance in your pattern. It does matter. You need to make sure that it matches with whatever you're sewing it to. So it is a good idea to keep a nice standard width of seam allowance, and as equal as it possibly can be. It's never going to be the same as each other. I've even got an electric cutter, and even when I use that, it still doesn't match up exactly. Okay, so I've ended up with 2 wool and 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of lining fabric. Okay, so I'm going to keep them all together for the moment, but ultimately I will discard 1 of them. Okay, so that is all the pieces cut out. The last thing I'm going to just show you is, and to check for myself, is I'm just going to get my front panels. Well, firstly I'll take my pocket and just match that up. Now they are, oh, that's interesting, they're different shapes. So I'm going to now match that up with the side of my trouser. Just check that's the same shape as the side of my front trouser. So let's start with my front. So that's my front trouser piece. So I'm going to lay those onto there and just match up my, they're not far off. I've gone out a little bit at the top there by the looks of things. I got a bit fancy with my cutting. So I'm just going to trim that off just slightly. But otherwise that's not a bad shape. It's not exact, but it's not a bad shape. So I'm then going to take that back to my pocket bag, match up my notches. I'm just going to reshape my pocket bag. Okay, and then just re-notch that top one. That one should be fine, yeah. Okay, so that's my pocket facings, my pocket bags. And then my front lining. So I'm going to put my lining down, and then lay that on top, and just see, actually it's matched. That's pretty good going. Matched down there, but it hasn't matched up the top, so I'm just going to reshape it there. Just going to notch my lining. So that's my lining piece. I'm going to leave that to one side, because the other thing I need to do with that is cut some stay flex, and then take my back pattern, back lining, sorry, and then take my back main piece, and we're just going to do exactly the same. And I've got a feeling this might be wrong. Let's just lay it over the top to begin with. Yeah, I think this has ended up being a little bit smaller than it should be, but because I think this pattern piece, I've just remembered, ended up being smaller than the actual trouser for some unknown reason. But okay, I think I might recut that, but I don't think you need to watch me recut that. So I'm going to recut that piece, but the shape of it is not too dissimilar. It just needs to be extended by about 1/4 inch, and 1/2 inch there, 1/4 inch over there. So I think if we moved it all over, it's a little bit low there, it won't matter, but I will just recut that just so that they match. Okay. In the next video, I will talk about the next step, basically. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's helped if you've never cut out a pair of trousers before, and help you understand what I'm talking about with seam allowance. Hopefully it's of interest. If you like what you're watching, then please like and subscribe. Thank you very much. Hi, just a little add-on note. I'm having a bit of a blonde moment, obviously. The reason that this, and no offence to blondes, I am not a natural blonde, but I identify as a blonde. I'm having a senior moment. Of course, this is going to be smaller than this because it's removed the dart, so that's why. But what I would like to do is I'm going to just amend that shape here, so that will match up to that, and I can just drop the main trouser piece down because we removed the. So I'm just going to reshape that. So yes, because this piece has got the dart in it, this piece hasn't. Of course, it's going to be smaller than that piece. So that's why. But when we've actually sewn the dart, this will end up being the same size as the lining. All right. So right, senior moment over, blonde moment over. Thank you for watching. Take care, everybody.